Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Strohmeyer. I am a science educator over at the Health Museum, and we are honored to present Dr. John Stevens, who is a vice president over at Menninger Clinic. We do Parents Let's Talk About Mental Health series with Menninger on Thursdays at noon. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn that over to Dr. Stevens to introduce our host and tell us about our topic today.
Well, thank you so much. And again, thank you to the Health Science Museum for hosting us. I'm really excited about today's talk on parenting in a digital world by my colleague for several years, Mallory Mintzberg. Just tell you a little bit about Mallory before we get into this topic. She trained here at University of Houston, did a practicum with adolescents at St. Thomas, I believe, Mallory, the Montrose area, and has been with the Menninger Clinic for the past 3 years. She's currently the program coordinator for our adolescent intensive outpatient program. The IOP, as we call it internally, is a program primarily built around groups where teens could come after school several days throughout the week to get intensive programming. That's usually a step above the traditional seeing your therapist once a week. They get that, but also get several hours of group in addition to psychiatric medication management. It's a wonderful program that's really thrived for Mallory, but unfortunately, one of the main sources of referrals for that program is problems with social media. Is that right, Mallory? So, and we've seen that an untimely post or picture that someone thought would be private that gets spread throughout a school can really cause major psychic distress for our youth. And I think this is so timely considering what we've seen learning about social media, its effect on youth, as well as the increasing rate of teen suicide. Just as a background before Mallory turned it over, since I began my journey in medicine about 20 years ago, the rate of suicide in teenage girls has tripled, which is staggering, and I don't think gets enough press and enough discussion. We don't know why, but if I was a researcher in this area, I would strongly suggest that the rise of social media and what social media has done with our youth could be at least one of the causes of this. And I think looking over some of your slides, Mallory, I couldn't wait. Last night I was looking over. It seems that you might be thinking some of the same ideas. So with that, I turn it over to Mallory, and I really look forward to her what looks like an excellent presentation on parenting in a digital age. Mallory.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you. As Dr. Stevens said, my name is Mallory Mintzberg. I think it's so funny that they wanted me to present on this because I don't know that I am the most technologically adept, as we will see as I try and share my screen here. Let's see if I can make it work. Let's see here. All right, that should work.
Looks great.
Awesome. So it's interesting to work with adolescents in the IOP. I don't think that I'm too old, but they will quickly alert you to the fact that you are not young. So we talk about social media, and I try very diligently to stay sort of on top of and adept at what's going on social media, but that things are moving so quickly, they will let you know that you're missing some stuff. So excited not only to talk to you guys about this topic, but because I had to then go and do some research and figure out the stuff that's going on social media that even I'm missing sometimes. So first, let's take a look at the problem itself. So in 2019, a survey conducted by this nonprofit, Common Sense, found that tweens are spending about 5 hours on screens a day, and teens are spending about 7.5 hours each day, basically an entire workday on their phones or computers. And that's excluding school and work hours. So during the pandemic, that number was pretty astronomical. But even now, as students are continuing to complete work and assignments online and on their computers, the screen time is most certainly over those 5 and 7.5 hour marks, right? Then in the graph, we can see that all adolescents are more likely to even have a screen or a smartphone now than in 2015. So I think around 50% of 13-year-olds in 2015, and then now in 2019, about 75% of 13-year-olds. So I want you to think about a 13-year-old. basically a baby in my mind. Now 3/4 of them have a smartphone or a screen. And that's about 25% more in just 4 years. And if we look even a little bit younger at the 11-year-olds, in 2019, they're at about the 50% mark. So half of 11-year-olds own and use a smartphone. So these kids are more and more likely to have access to social media and technology in their pockets, and then are spending more and more time on those screens, sort of connecting to that digital world. And if we take a look at what our kids are doing or what sites they're using online, we know from Pew Research Center that overall virtually all teens, almost 97%, use at least one of the social platforms identified in this graph. And things are changing quickly and constantly. So for example, the Pew Research Center surveyed teens last in 2015 and then again in 2019, and they found that TikTok has emerged as a leader in terms of the social media sites, but interestingly didn't even have enough of the share of the market in 2015 to be included in the survey. That's also true of YouTube. So things are changing rapidly. Also, in the previous survey, Facebook was the most used platform by about 70% of the respondents. And in the space of around 3 years, Facebook use has plunged from 70 to about 50%. So we can see that Facebook's been overtaken by Snapchat, Instagram in that time period. Back in 2015, about half of the teens use Instagram, as opposed to almost 75% now doing so. And just 40% use Snapchat, compared to about 70% doing so now. So again, things are changing and they're changing quickly. So I don't have the specifics of how many hours they're spending on each of these sites or platforms or applications, but we can see that there's a range of kiddos, almost 50%, who are on them constantly or hourly, and that's with school. They are spending time on these apps at school too. It's interesting, and I think worth noting, that there is a little bit of a gender gap in the platform preference. Girls are more apt than boys to identify Snapchat as their most used platform, about 42 to 29, compared to 29% for the boys, while boys cite YouTube as their most used overall, to about 40% to about 25%, sort of referencing back to what Dr. Stevens had started to talk about, like, why is this impacting girls? What's going on there? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a minute, but I think it's interesting to just take note of that gender gap. So our kids are on social media. Is it all bad? What's going on? So first, let's take a look at some of the pros of social media and digital connection. We and the kids all know, they'll tell you that there is something positive happening. Social media allows teens to communicate, stay up to date with family or friends, especially if they're around the world, allows kids to join or promote worthwhile causes, sort of raise awareness on important issues, helps them seek or offer emotional support during difficult times, especially if they're unable to get it at home, can provide a connection to social spheres, sort of if they live in suburban areas or remote areas, or have limited independence due to disabilities. Maybe some have debilitating social anxiety, or part of a marginalized group. Great at helping kiddos find an outlet for creativity and expression, of course. They also use social media for entertainment and self-expression. And the platforms can expose teens to current events, allow them to interact across geographic areas, teach them about a variety of subjects. In fact, I think some research suggests that social media that's funny or distracting, humorous, provides a meaningful connection to peers, and a wide social network might even help teens avoid depression. So great, so wonderful. Why all the complaining? What's going on, right? Well, let's take a look at some of the pitfalls or some of the harmful effects of social media. One of the biggest negative effects of social media usage is the feeling of inadequacy about one's life or appearance. I'm sure that anyone who's out there who has used social media has felt a tinge of this, or even more than a tinge. Even if you know that the images you're viewing on social media are manipulated or edited or changed, they can still make you feel pretty insecure about how you look or what's going on in your life. Imagine how that feels for a teen. Similarly, we're all aware that other people tend to share just the highlights of their lives, rarely the low points that everyone experiences. But even knowing that doesn't lessen those feelings of envy and dissatisfaction when you're scrolling through a friend's airbrush photos of their, tropical beach vacation, or reading about their new sort of exciting promotion at work. Interestingly, my sister-in-law, when she went through in vitro fertilization, IVF, her doctor sort of mandated that she get off social media. He said, if you're on it, all you're going to see are people having babies, and it's going to make you think that you're the only one not doing that. It's pretty helpful for her to sort of pull herself away from that for a little bit. So seeing all of this, feeling insecure about ourselves, feeling not as great, can sometimes lead to something we call FOMO, fear of missing out. Now, I had heard of FOMO probably maybe 5 years ago, but obviously the fear of missing out on something has been around far longer than just when social media came about. But sites such as Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat seem to exacerbate these feelings, and that sort of others are out there having more fun, living better lives than we are. This idea that you're missing out on certain things can certainly impact your self-esteem, trigger anxiety, fuel even greater social media use. FOMO can compel you to pick up your phone every few minutes to check for updates, see what other people are doing, compulsively respond to each and every alert, even if that means, doing so while you're driving, missing out on sleep, or prioritizing social media interaction and relationships over real world relationships. So this can lead into the next, isolation, right? So a recent study at the University of Pennsylvania found that high usage of Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram increases rather than decreases feelings of loneliness. Conversely, the study found that reducing social media usage can actually make you feel less lonely and isolated and improve your overall well-being. So interestingly, not seeing what other people are doing can actually make you feel more connected to them. Makes me curious if this is connected to the fear of missing out as a bit as well, that as our kids see others having more fun, they fear that others are hanging out without them and want to hang out without them. That impacting their self-esteem, then they pull back and isolate more, sort of this cause and effect. Social media can also impact depression and anxiety. Nothing reduces stress and boosts your mood faster than being with people who care about you, being in person. And the more you prioritize social media interaction over in-person relationships, the more you then isolate, the more you're at risk for developing or exacerbating mood disorders like depression or anxiety. Another negative side effect of social media use is cyberbullying. I think I read somewhere that about 10% of teens report being bullied on social media. And obviously other users are subjected to offensive comments, what we might call trolling. And social media platforms like Twitter can be hotspots for spreading hurtful rumors, lies, abuse that can sort of leave lasting emotional scars. And this is not new. I remember when instant messaging came out, a long time ago now, when I was young, and there was bullying then, and that was just one-on-one. Now, because of social media sites, other people can see this bullying and either get involved or do nothing. Another issue, a byproduct of all of this posting and sharing, can be self-absorption, something that some of us may already see in teens before we even introduce social media. But I think sharing this sort of these endless selfies and all of your innermost thoughts on social media can create this unhealthy self-centeredness and distance you from real life connections. As I said, something we might already see in teens sort of just get exacerbated on that social media. And then lastly, from some recent articles found to be published within Facebook, I think 60 Minutes just did a story on it that Facebook released a lot of internal research documents. It's found that among teens who reported suicidal thoughts, 13% of British users and 6% of American users traced their issues back to Instagram. The social media sites are having these negative impacts, these negative effects on teens and adolescents, and the teens may not necessarily even be aware of it. So, pretty bad, not good. These are some definite cons. But in fact, there is, like I said, the pros and cons. There is some mixed research about social media use. The message really isn't that it's all social media use per se that causes harm. It's about getting this balance between social media use and other age-appropriate activities and ensuring that there aren't specific negative things happening online. So as we dig a little deeper, we see, in a recent Time magazine study or article, they found that social media use over time contributed to poor mental health generally. However, it got a little bit more complicated when they looked at who was reporting cyberbullying, lack of sleep, and lack of exercise, those three things. They found that those three factors can almost completely predict whether someone would have poor mental health. So cyberbullying appeared to be the most damaging to girls, specifically followed by a lack of sleep and exercise. Something important to remember that cyberbullying can be active or passive. So active being people talking to them negatively, or passive, seeing images that impact them negatively. It's pretty important because obviously I think we think of cyberbullying as people saying mean things, making fun of someone, but it's a passive observation of things that make us feel badly about ourselves, this passive cyberbullying that exists as well. But going back to the study, in boys, these factors, the lack of sleep, lack of exercise, and cyberbullying actually only explained a small portion, about 12% of the relationship between social media and poor mental health. There are a few reasons that this may be true. For one thing, girls tend to be a little bit more susceptible to mental health conditions like depression and anxiety, regardless of screen time. But girls also experience more cyberbullying than boys and may be uniquely bothered by the certain aspects of it, like comments about appearance or negative comparisons with others. So let's refer back to sort of what Dr. Stevens was saying and what I was saying earlier about this gender gap, the difference between girls' use of Instagram and boys' use of YouTube and how that impacts the genders differently. Some research suggests that girls might interact with more active and then passive bullying through Instagram and Twitter, and that type of social interaction is a little bit less prevalent with YouTube, which involves more passive watching of content. And with boys specifically may not include content about their bodies and or image. So for example, I know a lot of boys, even adult boys who watch video game content, they watch other people play video games, so less about body image and negative feelings about themselves. So I think that really begs the obvious question, right? What is bad or negative content then? From Facebook's recent internal research, the one that they were talking about on 60 Minutes, teen girls said that social media has the biggest impact on how they feel about their bodies, even more so than looking in their mirror, their health, or how their clothes fit. I found it pretty shocking that social expectations and what they see online overrides their confidence and intuition. Their friends actually have less direct input than influencers that they follow, who dictate what their body should look like and how they should treat it. So friends might say they look great, give really positive feedback, but the influencers that they're following look different. And so they understand that this is what they should look like, and these images are a presentation of what their body should be. And whether it's active or passive, meaning whether they see someone directly comment about their appearance or just see other bodies that they want to emulate, they obviously form ideas about their ideal body and feel pressure to look different. About 90% of girls say they compare themselves to images in the media, and about half claim that they feel negatively affected by this. So when asked, they are able to identify that the images that they look at sometimes make them feel worse. And if we follow this line out further, looking at that relationship between body image in teens and girls and self-esteem, decreased confidence leads to increased anxiety and depression. A 2017 study that I found, so a little bit less recent, but 2017 found that negative self-comparison predicted immediate effect on emotions after browsing other social profiles. So I don't know that that has changed. I could imagine it may be even higher, but basically saying that when girls are looking at other people's profiles, immediately after their mood shifts, we can tell that they feel worse. In that study, 32% of teen girls said that when they felt bad about their bodies, Instagram made them feel worse. And what's super tragic is Facebook's own research says that as young women and adolescents and teen girls begin to sort of consume this eating disorder or body image content, they get more and more depressed. And it actually makes them use the app more. They end up in this feedback cycle where they hate their bodies more and more. This makes for obviously this painful cycle. The more you browse, the more depressed you are, the more depressed you are, the more you post and browse. And while I speak about these phenomena regarding girls and their bodies, the same Facebook internal research also reportedly found that 14% of boys in the US said Instagram made them feel worse about themselves as well. So this is not just happening to girls. I think it's just an easier lens to look at it through. So I wanted to focus on just a piece of the previous slide for a second, this spiral of social media. It's important to think about the fact that the excessive social media use can create this negative self-perpetuating cycle. So when you feel lonely, depressed, anxious, or stressed, you use social media more often as a way to relieve boredom or feel connected to others because we believe that makes us feel connected to others. However, using social media more often, right, we talked about increases FOMO, increases this fear of missing out, increases feelings of inadequacy, dissatisfaction, isolation. In turn, these feelings negatively affect our mood, worsen symptoms of depression, anxiety, and stress, and these worsening symptoms cause you to use social media more. And so the downward spiral continues on and on. So we talked about how social media can be problematic, but how do we know if it's a problem for our team specifically? This is a really tough question. I think the question I get most often is, how much time should my kiddo be on social media? How much time should I allow for screens? So everyone is different, and there is no specific amount of time spent on social media or the frequency you check your updates, the number of posts you make that indicate your use is becoming problematic or unhealthy. Rather, I think obviously it has to do with the impact time spent on social media has on your mood and other aspects of your life, along with your motivations for using it. So for example, your social media use may be problematic if you causes you to, if you find yourself not interacting with people face to face, if you neglect those relationships, if you are distracted from work or school, if social media use leaves you feeling jealous or angry or depressed. Similarly, if you're motivated to use social media just because you're bored or lonely or want to post something to make others jealous or upset, it may be time to reassess your social media habits. Indicators that social media may be adversely affecting your mental health might include spending more time on social media than with real-world friends, using it maybe even as a substitute a lot of for your offline social interaction. Even if you're out with friends in real life, using that connection to check, or using your screens to check social media, often driven by this fact that others might be having more fun, right? That FOMO. Comparing yourself unfavorably with others on social media, you have low self-esteem or negative body image. You may even have patterns of disordered eating. If you're experiencing cyberbullying, are you worried that you have no control over the things people post about you? Being distracted at work or school, you feel pressure to post regularly about yourself or get comments on your posts or respond quickly to other people's posts. I was talking to a kiddo, an adolescent in group the other day, and they said that they had to make sure that they liked a friend's post so then the friend would like their post too. So again, it's not necessarily even about this social interaction. It's sort of accruing these likes, accruing these points. Having no time for self-reflection. So if every spare moment is filled by engaging with social media, it might be an issue, might be indicative of a problem. Engaging in risky behavior in order to gain likes or shares or positive reactions on social media. So people are playing dangerous pranks, posting embarrassing content, cyberbullying others, driving or checking while driving. I think there were several challenges, I think they call them, that were going on recently. They had the Tide Pod challenge that happened years ago, cinnamon challenge where people eating a sort of full spoon of cinnamon and they were choking. And I think several young people either ended up in the hospital or worse, things like that. Suffering from sleep problems. So if you find yourself missing out on sleep, staying up, the light itself can cause issues and problems, disrupt your sleep, but also just not putting your phone down, not going to sleep. And then worsening symptoms of anxiety or depression. Rather than helping to alleviate any of these negative feelings or boost your mood, in fact, you feel more anxious, depressed, or lonely after using social media. So something I sort of use is a couple questions to ask our teens to get an idea of what we just talked about. Are you using social media as a substitute for real life? We can also ask, are you an active or passive user on social media? Are you posting a lot? Are you wanting likes? Are you providing likes for other people? Are you putting out content, making content? And then finally, sort of, does social media leave you feeling inadequate or disappointed about your life? How does social media leave you feeling? So we've taken a look at the scope of the problem and how it's impacting teens. But what do we do about it? How do we make sure our kids are safe and not being negatively impacted by that social media use? One of the first things that we want to think about is with our really young kiddos. Rather than giving your kiddo a smartphone immediately and letting them download multiple social media apps from the beginning, first, consider letting your child text with a best friend or a cousin on a shared family device to start. That way you can sort of monitor and be a part of that process. I have to tell you, I've got a 7, almost 8-year-old nephew who sent me a message the other day on Facebook Messenger. That was pretty crazy. I was not expecting to get a message from him. He then FaceTimed me or video called me from the Facebook Messenger app. We were talking, and I found out later he and multiple of his friends communicate with each other, enjoy FaceTiming or video calling. Interestingly, one of the kiddos has access to Uber Eats, and my nephew wanted some candy. He got his buddy to order Uber Eats off of his parents' account, and my nephew got candy 15 minutes later. Obviously, the parents got involved. Things were not so happy. He did not get to eat this said candy. But I think it's important to think about, that these kiddos are getting these things early. So in the beginning, really being a part of that process with them. Even before you get them an iPhone or an app, there are phones that are for small or young kiddos. I think there's one called a Gab phone, which doesn't allow for any web or application browsing. Or another one is Pinwheel, a smartphone with multiple built-in parental controls. So you can sort of monitor your child's communication. Additionally, think about the most appropriate age for your child to start using social media or even a screen at all. We want to look at personality, impulsivity, maturity. Are they ready? I know that there's a lot of pressure for one kiddo gets it, all my friends have it. How can I not be on Snapchat? They're all on Snapchat. But taking into account, is your kiddo ready for that? Are they mature enough to have that conversation and know what's right and wrong to do? Allowing them to add one social app when they're ready. So rather than going from 0 to 100, start with 1. If they can use Instagram appropriately, then move on to the next, sort of that way. I found this pretty shocking. A study published in 2016 found that fewer than half of the parents surveyed regularly discussed social media content with their teen or young kiddo. Obviously, experts suggest that it's helpful to talk to your teenager about who they're following, how these accounts make them feel, and then having these conversations often and early is pretty important. For example, you may want to work out how they want to treat other people, how they want to be treated online. So what kind of comments will you make? What are things you might not comment on? What are things that if you see, might you alert me to? Start those conversations, start them thinking, critical thinking. You can also talk with your teen at this time about what to do if something bad happens online. So if someone's bullying them or bullying someone else, or if someone is asking for private information, giving kids examples of what they can say can be incredibly helpful. We just had this HR training over here, and it was about, what do you do if you see something at the workplace that you don't agree with? And I think what's so challenging is for kiddos, especially, often when you see something, you don't really know what to say. Maybe you don't want to put yourself out there. This training was great because it gave all of these examples of maybe you could talk to them later and say, hey, I saw that wasn't right. Or maybe you could say, hey, this isn't right, and then walk away, right? Gave all these options. And I thought, wow, I hadn't even thought about that. So helping your kid talk through some ways they might handle things is going to get them thinking about that early. Once they have a smartphone or starting to begin engage in that social media world, you want to remove phones, tablets, or other screens from their bedroom at night. Often kids tell me that they use their phone as an alarm clock. Little do they know, alarm clocks exist outside of their phones. Feel free to purchase them one of those, as we all used prior to having smartphones. You want to remove screens, not just at bedtime, but maybe put parameters on when use of screens is okay. So for example, no screens at dinner time. Just maybe 2 weeks ago, my partner and I, we were sitting across from each other on the couch, watching football, both on our screens. And I just looked up and said, what are we doing here? What is happening? This is crazy. So we both decided that when we come home until 8:30 or 9, no phones. It was creating this space where we weren't even speaking to each other, and I was not okay with that. So making sure that you're sort of putting those parameters on for them. Even when you allow your kiddo to use an app or social media, choose one platform, one time period. So you can say, for example, you can use Instagram for 30 minutes a day. You can use Snapchat for an hour. And you can set that limit via your phone. On Apple, I think there's something called family sharing settings. On Android, there's an app called Family Link. And when that time limit is up, the app on your child's phone is no longer accessible. To prevent unwanted downloads, there's also an ask to buy setting on Apple phones. I don't know what it is on Android. That will send a request to parents when kiddos want to buy or download a new item. Really helpful. If you have a kid who's a little bit tech savvy, who might try to override settings like this, you may need to physically remove their devices after the time limit. Keep in mind, found out about this in the adolescent group. Some of the kiddos are not allowed to have Instagram. So parents watch them delete it from the phone, and then they walk away. Kiddos re-download it, and then right before they give it back to their parents, they delete it again. Doesn't actually delete their profile or their information, it just deletes it from the phone. So parents are going to have to be pretty savvy too, right? So I read a recent report that said, shockingly and not shockingly, that most teens and tweens with a phone or tablet do not use any applications or tools to track their device time, right? But obviously, experts suggest that doing so is really helpful for them to see how much time they're spending on it. I get that same notification on my phone for that. I hate getting it. It always pops up saying like, you've spent 9 hours on your phone today. And I'm so confused, like, how is that possible? It's always embarrassing. And I'm at a loss for how I could have spent that much time, but it is helpful, right? Sort of gives you that little shock of, oh, I need to be careful. I'm spending a lot of time, or I think the message says per week or something. But so having those conversations again can just be a trigger of like, oh, I'm spending too much time. We also want to talk to our teens not just about the time they're spending on social media, but how the things that they're looking at are changing what future things they are fed. So teens should be especially cautious of any dieting or exercise sites or accounts that they follow. Often algorithms will serve up content to who you're sort of based on who your teen is already following, what they search for, and how they browse online, right? That is why when you're browsing for lamps, all you're going to see for the next couple of days are lamps, right? The applications are learning from your searches and browsing what to serve up to you in the future. Something to know is that teenagers can dig a little bit into their social media setting to find out why certain ads are popping up in their feeds. So in security, access data, under ads interest, you can view specific things that Instagram thinks you like based on your personal data. So most students don't even know that this exists. Most adults don't even know that this exists, but you can start to see what Facebook or Instagram thinks that you like, and that's why they are serving up these ads. An additional tool I often use on my phone or with my clients is making a contract. So consider making a social media agreement with your kids, a real physical contract that they can sign. It's incredibly helpful so everyone is on the same page. We can say, look, we all agreed to this. These are the consequences. These are the rewards, however you want to do it. In the contract, they can agree to not use social media to hurt others, not to gossip, not to bully. They can also agree to protect themselves. So it's pretty important. And in regard to privacy, some of the things you can talk about is not to share personal information, phone numbers, birth dates, things like that with people they don't know. Not to add phone numbers to any private profiles. Regularly check your privacy settings. Keep your passwords and login details private, not to share with friends. I think this one's incredibly important, and also to have that conversation with them of, what do you do if your friend asks for it? What do you do if your friend is like, hey, just like give me your password real quick, I'll sign us in, right? How can they respond in a way that doesn't make them feel awkward or uncomfortable, but keeps their privacy? And then always to log out after using public computers. Oftentimes they're in, school laptops, a library, whatever it might be. And don't forget, obviously, setting a good example through our own virtual behavior can go a long way towards sort of helping your kids use social media safely. It's okay to be open and honest about your own feelings when using social media. So if you're having a conversation with them, letting them know that it's difficult sometimes to put the phones down. I just last week was telling my kids in the adolescent group about the situation with my partner and I. I wanted them to see that we were struggling with it too. But I also wanted them to see that we wanted to do something about it. And so we did. And here's how we handled it. So they can sort of start to have ideas for themselves. So while we're talking about the specifics of looking at the digital world and social media use for our teens, something I always like to end with is how we differentiate between typical teen behavior and depressive and anxiety symptoms. I think it's really challenging for especially parents to see in teens, because a lot of anxiety and depression symptoms are typical teen behaviors like sleeping late, changes in eating and diet, etc. So I want us to take just a minute to look at this. And we're going to start with anxiety, right? We're going to look at they might be more clingy. They might be restless or complain of stomach aches or headaches. They might display changes in eating or sleeping habits, difficulty concentrating, struggling to not get too emotional or too upset. They might get more angry, irritability. Again, something that we often see with teens that we're going to try and look for. The thing I say about anxiety and depression too, it's not that we're looking for these symptoms as one-offs. We're looking for big changes in behavior. So we're looking for kiddos who used to be pretty active, pretty outgoing, and now they have isolated, they pulled back, they aren't eating or they're eating a ton, things like that. That's really what we're looking for. And then depression, a lot of these are going to look similar. And I'm meant to say in anxiety, we're not just looking for emotional changes, we're looking for physical symptoms as well. So those can be lots of stomach aches, headaches, sweating, things like that we don't always connect with mental health, but there can be physical issues as well. So with depression, we're looking for a loss of interest in activities we used to enjoy or they used to enjoy. So if your kiddo, used to be all about playing on the soccer team and they really enjoyed those friends and now they've really pulled back and isolated and now they aren't doing that, or they used to be really into art or photography, whatever their interest might be, they've stopped doing that. That's what we're looking for. Also looking at their sleep, how that has changed, if they're having difficulty sleeping or if they're oversleeping. If we find fatigue or decreased energy, lack of motivation, difficulty thinking quickly or clearly, looking for irritability and frustration, pessimism, sort of, no, that won't work, or no one likes me. Again, not necessarily instant specific, but looking at an overall trend of a big change here of who they used to be. So that is all of the material that I have for you guys today. I really appreciate you guys letting me come and talk to you a little bit about parenting in a digital world. Hopefully some of this was helpful.
Mallory, was very helpful and very interesting. I loved hearing you talk about this and definitely got some pointers. Although I guess I didn't see LinkedIn, where I'm on social media, as being one of the big ones. So wasn't even 1%.
I forgot that one. Forgot that.
I don't think that's very popular with our group. Well, there's several questions, and I just want to get into a couple of them and just kind of questions from the audience. One is, some teens are changing their photos before posting them. For example, using filters or editing applications. How does the way that teens post pictures of themselves, or your child's way of posting pictures of themselves, or their friends impact how they feel about themselves. Any thoughts about that? I mean, deliberately, I guess, changing the pictures to look differently. How should that be a red flag, or at least a yellow flag for a parent or clinician?
Yeah. So it isn't something that I put in my presentation, but I think it's incredibly important. About maybe 2 years ago, I read an article about Facetune. Not everyone uses Facetune. There are a bunch of different apps like it, but basically, so I had put it at the end here because I wasn't sure if I was even going to use it or not, ended up not using it. But Facetune changes, it allows you to change your picture. So it's very subtle. And if you can see in this second photo, the one on the right, or the bigger, more zoomed in photo, you can see that the lines in the background are wavy. And so you can see that this woman, I believe this is Kylie Jenner from the Kardashian group, has sort of made the line of her shoulder a little bit smaller. And it's pretty subtle, but she felt like it was important to do. And if you see, here's another one, you can see that just smoothed out her skin tone. And then the last one, this is the same girl. She looks very similar, but you can see in the fence that she has sort of narrowed parts of her body to appear slimmer. So what some research has shared is that the availability of Facetune and apps like it have made people start to tweak their photos. And although people are aware that they're doing it and are aware that their celebrity people, the accounts that they follow are doing it, it makes it so that it normalizes it, that they can do it too. And what it starts to do is makes teens feel like this is how they should look. That it's small enough to think, yeah, I didn't make myself a different person, but clearly the space between my neck and shoulder should be smaller, right? And some of the research was talking about that some people are taking these pictures into plastic surgeons and requesting that they look just a little bit different. I thought these pictures were pretty interesting. Helps to see that once you begin editing your photos, it's hard to stop. And so I had, interestingly, my sister, I found out that she was using Facetune, and I was shocked. And I said, Erin, what are you doing? Why are you using this? And she said, oh, I don't know. I just look a little bit better. And what I found is it was highly used during the pandemic, and it actually caused anxiety in students in teens, they didn't want to be seen after the pandemic because they had been changing the way that they looked for so long. They were scared people would either call them out for using it or tell them that they had sort of looked a little bit different. So we want to start talking to our kiddos that there's no reason to change. And if you start changing, it's not good. You're sort of you're presenting yourself differently, and that to be aware that the people they're following are using those too, because it's setting up this unreal expectation for what other people look like.
Okay, well, I'll have to Facetune, for the holiday card sending out for the
right.
No. But it sounds like there's a dark side to it. It sounds like, again, it's kind of almost digital plastic surgery, but then it could get to be a problem and something you can't take back. Mallory, if you wouldn't mind, a few more questions. What should I do if we've already developed or fallen into bad habits during the lockdown? I assume bad habits with social media, and we need to reset. And the second question, I don't know if it's the same person or different. How can I manage positive screen time schedules throughout my day? I think those questions are actually linked. If you've already if the train has left the station and your child, your teenager or preteen is already kind of using this unhealthy amount, as you suggest, level of social media, how do you reset in a way that doesn't seem punitive, even if you're trying to help them develop a better habit?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think the first step, as always, is beginning a conversation. Talking to them about how they're feeling, talking about how being on these sites is making them feel, be open and honest about your use and how being on those sites is making you feel. Talk about how they want to feel. What kind of social media use do they want? What are they getting out of it? How could that be different? As I said, a tool that I use constantly with parents is a contract. It's an breathing, living, evolving piece that you can start to put down parameters, and those can evolve and grow. And so you all get to be involved in the making of it so that no one feels that this is being handed down like an edict, but instead we are having a conversation looking at what we want our family social media use to look like, and then moving forward with that. And maybe that means starting small, like I did with my partner, and say, listen, we got to get off our phones tonight. Like we just cannot, we cannot do it. Maybe starting at dinner, say, hey, listen, from now on at dinner, I'd love for us to put our phones in the middle or even off the table completely. How about we start with that? So starting small can really help as well. And then we were reminding Dr. Stevens, the second part of that question.
Oh, it was how do I manage positive screen time schedules? Does that go into the contract, what the times would be throughout the day? Specifically, do you get that granular with kids and with families?
Oh, certainly. I mean,
Okay.
if we have a family that is really struggling, then I would get as granular as possible. You really want to go micro. If you have a kiddo who you're just sort of starting this conversation with, maybe you start a little bit more general and at a macro sense. But if you're really struggling, we want to get the specifics down and saying, hey, here's when you can use it. Here's sort of the rewards. So again, making the contract not just punitive, but here's the expectations. Here's when you can have it. Here's when I want you to have access to this stuff.
Someone just followed up, and other than contacting you, Mallory, and I know you'd be more than happy to talk to folks, is there a place we can go to see an example contract? What would that contract actually look like?
Yeah, you are welcome to reach out to me. I have so many examples. You could also Google. I am very reticent to ever suggest Googling because it is can be a black hole. But if you look up parental contracts, it's a good place to start. You really want to have a portion of the contract that talks about why we're having this contract, what your role as a parent is. We want to tell them that we love and care about them. This is not to be punitive. This is not punishment. This is setting expectations so we can all move forward in a positive direction. The next piece, you want to talk about what the expectations and guidelines for them are, what the consequences are, and then what they can expect from you as well, right? This is a give and take. They should be able to say, I know that mom is not going to use her phone from 7 to 9 because we're going to hang out. Some of those kids really need that. They want to know that when they don't have a phone, that you're not either, that we're going to actually be able to spend time. And when I need mom or dad, they're going to be around. So taking a look at what's out there on Google with a grain of salt. And if you have any questions, reach out to me, reach out to any therapist. They are a million to give.
It really sounds like some of the lifestyle interventions we hear about, the recommendations for children with overweight or obesity, that it has to be not just the child has to be put on a diet or changed to a healthier eating. It's really the whole family. It can't just be like, you do this, but I get to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm hearing echoes of that. It sounds like you would agree as well. It's a whole family intervention. It's not just blaming or targeting the child.
Certainly. As I said, parents are guilty of the same things or different things. So we need to let our kids know. And they may say, yeah, mom, but you're not on your phone, but you're on TV. So maybe the conversation needs to expand a little bit to how do we engage as a family? How much interaction are we wanting? Not just for the kids.
If we have time, Mallory, a couple more. It's sparked a lot of debate. I'm not surprised, and questions. Here's an opinion and a question here about parental control software. I feel much of today's digital content would be harmful for children's psychological and moral development. Can you please advise us on how to maximize the effectiveness of parental control softwares? First of all, for me, since the person asking the question knows more than I do, what are the common parental control softwares? Do you have a favorite? And again, then the question here from the audience, how would you maximize the effectiveness of a parental control software?
Great question. The two that I put in the presentation, Gab and Pinwheel, are two that I know of. There's one other that, as you asked the question, it was slipping from my mind that I know a couple of my clients' parents use, like Fox or something. I will find it and get it to you guys. Basically, what some of them do is limit completely that you can't be on this at all or can't do this. But some of the more nuanced ones that I've seen target texts and posts. So they're looking for buzzwords. So NIC, N-I-C, became a buzzword recently for nicotine. And a lot of the kids were using NIC as the term, and several apps or software programs weren't catching it. So we need these apps and software programs to be up to date. So you really want to find one that evolves and gets updates pretty regularly. The one that I'm thinking of, if a text had a buzzword, it sent that text and 2 texts before to the parents, but it allowed the child to continue to have some privacy. If you deleted a picture, it sent it to your parents, but if you didn't, it stayed on your phone. However, parents have access to your phone, but I thought it was a really nice way to balance this need, especially as teens get older, for privacy with, hey, if you're doing nothing wrong, app shouldn't catch anything. And then you get to have complete privacy. So it is tricky. The teens are learning quicker than I think the software and applications can run. So staying on top of what's current.
And
Dr.
you start
Stevens, I'd be interested. Do you know of a couple that are in use? Do you know any?
You have to look. I mean, I've heard parents use them. I don't recommend it. It's interesting. I look more from the mental health point of view, especially a lot of parents feel very powerless for a child that's engaging in self-harm or has had suicidal thoughts. And we know that the majority of children who try to end their life or end their life reached out to someone, oftentimes a friend, in the month or 2 before an attempted or actual suicide. So I tend to be a fan of that for those high risk patients that I see, that it can give parents that feel powerless to intervene or feel that there's nothing they can do, or the child's not talking to them. Well, the child might be talking to them. They might be talking to a friend, and it can be helpful. But the names, I think one might have been Some Things 360, maybe one called Oath. And then, I think it's a very kind of frothy kind of market where there's these come and go. And, I guess some, like you said, they have to really be updated quite rapidly, but there's some out there. And, it oftentimes speaks to some parents that feel they've lost control by the time they're having to do that. And sometimes yeah, please. No, go ahead.
I just remembered Bark. BARK is the one that had slipped my mind as soon as you asked. But Bark, one of the teens was telling me about it actually, and it sounded really nuanced, that it was not about just total control, but it tried to balance this control plus privacy.
We talked about anxiety and depression at the end of your talk. Someone asked, what do I do if my child is saying that they feel suicidal or feeling hopeless and helpless? So again, these probably more severe end of the spectrum. If that comes up as a therapist yourself, what do you say to parents that? I know this is common for you.
Yeah, I think parents really struggle here because it can be really scary. It can feel overwhelming. And like you mentioned, there's this helpless feeling. I don't know what to do. I don't know how, where to go with this. So I think the first thing I always tell parents is start asking. If you're worried or you're concerned, parents are worried that if they bring this up, that they will be planting this idea in their kiddo's head. And that's just, the research just says that that's just not true. That if your child or teen is already thinking about it, or is thinking about it, they've been thinking about it. You're not going to introduce this idea. So having that conversation, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Are you thinking about killing yourself? We want to use real words too. We don't want to use euphemisms like, are you thinking about ending it? Are you thinking about, doing something bad, right? We want to be really clear so that we know and they know what it is that we're talking about. Additionally, if they're saying yes, we want to ask, do you have a plan? What are you thinking? Tell me about it. And that helps us gauge sort of how serious, how urgent we need to be. Now, before we even get there, there's a couple things that we want to look for. We want to look for isolation. We want to look for, what we're looking for are warning signs like isolation, increase of drug or substance use. We want to look for depressed mood, low motivation, eating or sleeping more. A lot of these are going to be signs of depression and anxiety, right? And so that can make it very confusing. We're looking for discussion of, how would I describe it? Sort of hopelessness, this expressing hopelessness, that there's no point, nothing is going to change, feeling like they don't have any control over what's happening to them or in their life. Those are the big stuff that we're going to look for. And then beginning to have those conversations. If you're worried about that, reach out to a mental health facility, reach out to a therapist, talk to someone, get them talking to someone quickly.
Just great advice, a wonderful talk. You said at the beginning you weren't an expert, but I learned a lot, and I think clearly you have tons of expertise. And thank you so much. Thank you, as always, to Health Science Museum. This is another wonderful talk, which will be online even after today. So if you missed something, or apparently I missed the gab in that, you could go back and learn about it or reach out to Mallory to see her contact information here. Thank you so much, Mallory, for educating us on this. So timely.
Thank you guys.
Awesome. That I learned so much. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and we had to take her iPad away. Well, okay, let me back up. I felt like I had to take her iPad away due to the unlimited screen time, and I just was totally lost as to what to do. In the contract, I'm doing the contract this weekend.
Yeah,
for sure. Thank
it's
you
so
so
helpful,
much.
and I think it also can help her feel like she has power in this, that she has a role to play too, not just mom and dad are making me do this.
And she's one of these where, and I think all kids are maybe to an extent, but she's very much, I try to build opportunities into her every day to have some power over her life, or we get the act outs. And I get it. I'm the same way, right? I'm a grown up.
Exactly. Exactly.
Anyway, Dr. Stevens, Mallory, thank you so much for today's talk. I learned so much. I always learn so much from the Menninger talks. On behalf of the Health Museum, I really thank all of you all for joining it. All of you all know. I thank all of you for joining us today. Come see us on site. We are open and ready for visitors. Masks are required. Friendly reminder. We have Beautiful Minds, Dyslexia and the Creative Advantage on display until May. And please do join us for our next Let's Talk About Mental Health. A better night's sleep cures more than fatigue on Thursday, January 20th from noon to 1 with Menninger.
That'd be great. Thank you.